Good afternoon, everyone. This is Lynn Dyer with the Foodservice Packaging Institute. We are certainly pleased to host this webinar for, right now, we're at 81 and counting, different attendees from across the United States. With America Recycles Day just 1 week away, this is a great time to really talk about the clarity of our recycling messages, and we hope that today's webinar will help you do that. Today we have a variety of panelists with some practical advice for you to take home with you, specifically on recycling and outreach education materials. So we have the panelists that we have today include Natha Dempsey, who's the Vice President of the Foodservice Packaging Institute, my colleague sitting next to me. Marissa Segundo, a consultant with the Resource Recycling Systems. Jason Hale, who's with the communication team at the Recycling Partnership. And lastly, Brenda Pulley, who is Senior Vice President of Recycling at Keep America Beautiful. Before we get started, we'd just like to go over a couple of different logistics for you. So as of right now, you can hear us, but we can't hear you. We just don't want to hear all the background noises, and everybody else doesn't want to hear them as well. So you're on mute right now for the duration of the webinar. But we do want you and encourage you to ask questions. So if you're looking at the screen to the right, you'll see a box where you can enter your questions, and we'll be taking questions at the end of each of the presentations as well as at the end of the webinar to wrap up as well. So let's get started as quickly as possible so we give our panelists enough time. So first up is Natha Dempsey and Marissa Segundo. Natha Dempsey, again, I mentioned, is with the Foodservice Packaging Institute, and she has over 15 years of industry-related and association experience. During her time here at FPI, going on her anniversary, what, 6 years, something like that? She's focused on a variety of things for the association, including outreach, communications, and technical work, in addition to all the work that FPI does with our recovery for food service packaging. Joining her is Marissa Segundo, who's a consultant with RRS. She is an insights-driven public relations strategist with more than 10 years of success in strategic planning, media relations, and team leadership. She's a passionate cause-related communicator, and she's also proud to be a proactive bridge builder for the Hispanic community. Prior to joining RRS, Marissa was the recycling coordinator for the city of Largo, Florida, and has developed strategic communications plans regarding sustainability, waste reduction, and recycling. Her recycling communication strategies have earned multiple awards at the state, local, national, and international levels, and we're delighted to have both of them join us. So Natha and Marissa, I'll let you kick it off.
Sure. One more, Kelly. Thank you. First of all, thank you everybody for joining us. This is Natha Dempsey. You're going to hear both Marissa and I as we sort of pass this back and forth between the two of us. The Foodservice Packaging Institute works very closely with Resource Recycling Systems on a lot of our recovery work, and this presentation is very much a reflection of that. So first of all, a little bit about the Foodservice Packaging Institute. We are old. We were established in 1933, which makes us over 83 years old. We are the trade association that represents and is solely focused on single-use food service packaging products in North America. Our membership includes those converters, those people that are making the cups and containers, as well as their raw material and machinery suppliers. And we represent about 85 to actually 90% of the industry. We also offer a membership. It is free for any food service distributors or operators that would care to join. Next, please. So first of all, what is food service packaging? The best way that we can describe this is your single-use food service packaging product that you see in food service establishments. I'm going to assume that everybody on the call has already been to a restaurant, either in-house or taken food out of that establishment in a food service packaging product. It's those things that are cups, containers, boxes, bags, also things like stirrers, cutlery, straw, lids. All of those items are what we consider food service packaging. There are 19 different product categories in that space, but specifically for our work in this first phase of recovery, we're focused on cups, containers, boxes, and bags, those examples that you see on the slide in front of you. Okay, so for our resident messaging survey portion, I'm going to turn it over to start to Marissa.
So
Sure, thank you, Nessa. So this was a project that was really important, specifically when talking about bringing new food service packaging items, as Nessa mentioned, the cups, containers, boxes, and bags, into curbside programs. And as our recycling landscape changes a bit, we wanted to first go about this in a very informed way. So before we even committed this survey, we did a broad overview of what was out there already. We consulted industry resources such as the American Plastics, the Association of Plastics Recyclers, the American Forest and Paper Association, the American Chemistry Council, Sustainable Packaging Coalition, the Recycling Partnership, and dozens of other cities and counties, both large and small, to discover what terms and images that they were already using in their recycling messaging. To find out, and then specifically ones that were using food service packaging already. And this informed questions that we were asking residents. So this was a web-based survey. We wanted to identify what terms and language was most ringing true with residents at the point of recycling. So we took a sample set of 1,000 panelists. These are homeowners, verified homeowners, ages 18 and up, both an even sample of male and female. And what that means is that the evidence or the answers that you're going to see to the survey questions today are 95% statistically significant for use on a national level. So the idea is to kind of bring these best practices available for use, you know, in your own programs and insights that may inform your own recycling messaging. So go to the next slide. All right, so specifically we focused on language. So what terms, I had mentioned what terms best resonate with residents. And this is something that in recycling, there's not that universal language. And so this is kind of the help to bring clarity in the next questions that we're asking. So we'll go to the next slide to look at the first question. And we asked residents, we showed them a picture of this plastic container that you see in the center of the screen, or the right side of the screen, and we said, what would you call this? And we gave them the following examples that you see. And in the industry, we tend to call this a clamshell container. But John Q. Public, that may not be the term that rings most true with them. So 61% of residents would rather call this a plastic container, very simply. And then 19% said a clamshell container. So the takeaway from this is, when possible, avoid jargon and industry-specific terms and speak on the resident's level for terms that they understand. And we'll go to the next slide. And Natha's going to take this one.
Yep, I'll jump back in here. This is just another example of a question we asked, and you'll see the container that we're discussing on the right here. And if you look at the responses that came back from everyone, there's 4 different responses there. You'll notice that none of them use the word styrofoam. This is because styrofoam is actually a trademark name that's owned by the Dow Chemical Company to describe some insulation product. It has nothing to do with food service at all. So one of the things that we wanted to do was to avoid using an inaccurate term to describe a product. One of the other things when we're looking at terms and words used, one of the other things that we like to do is take it as an opportunity to educate that maybe some materials have outdated terms like wax-coated cups. Cups that are coated are no longer coated with wax. They haven't been coated with wax for a very long time, and it's confusing and misleading to use the term wax-coated. Words like tin cans. We all know, hey, it's a tin can. Well, no, actually it's not. Cans are not primarily tin anymore. So we like to avoid those types of terminology when we're looking at food service packaging in particular. Next slide, please. Marissa, I'm going to shoot this one back to you.
Sounds great. So this was another one that it was really important, going back to our original intention of making this a web-based survey to show people pictures of a potential recyclable that they are at that decision point. Do I recycle this? Do I throw this away? So pizza boxes are one of the things that we wanted to, there's a lot of confusing messaging, and we wanted to test in a different format by showing them 3 different examples of pizza boxes and testing the language as far as the instructions. So we did A/B testing. So that basically means half of the respondents were shown instructions that referred to a clean pizza box, recycling a clean pizza box. The other half were shown instructions that read no food soiled pizza boxes. And they were all asked to rate on a sliding scale the likelihood that they would recycle each box. And so the intent was to determine which instructions are most effective in achieving acceptable pizza boxes. So when we're talking about acceptable pizza boxes and we look at these 3, we've done previous research with 10 of the largest U.S. corrugated cardboard mills that would be taking these pizza boxes. And of the 3, the only one that is unacceptable is number 1. And it's hard to see from the photo, but the number 1, and the residents could enlarge the photos at the time just so they can see which one is clear. Number 1 has visible cheese residue. That makes that unacceptable. And then the other 2 just have a mild presence of oil. So they are acceptable in most mills. So the biggest difference between these terms was an increase in recycling of acceptable boxes according to the end market. So we found that you can see from the scale that the use of clean was more effective than no food soils on boxes 2 and 3. So this could be indicative of a couple of things. One, the use of the word clean was helpful in achieving clean pizza boxes. Also, it could be, in my opinion, it's better to use a positive term rather than a negative term. A lot of times residents will be overwhelmed with the long list of no's rather than this is what we need, this is what we want to have in your recycling cart or bin. So instead of having them glaze over their list of no's, focusing on the positive. And I found that as a recycling coordinator was also very effective. All right, so we'll go to the next slide. So we had a similar situation where with paper bags. We wanted to find out if the guidelines simply stated paper. They don't say paper bags, they just say paper. Which of these 2 bags residents would recycle? The top bag you can see has fries and it has condiment packages in there. And then the second one is empty. So overall, 78% of residents said that they would recycle the correct bag, the empty bag. But we did have 13% and overall 15% of people who would recycle the bag with food in it if not given further guidance. So this is important to use clear language and also visuals. So if you can show an empty bag, that may be effective, and sometimes just to use that clean and empty terminology is most clear to achieve those acceptable bags. All right, so we'll go to the next slide, and Natha's going to take this one.
Sure. This is actually just another example of precisely what Marissa was just speaking about. What we wanted to do here with this question was get to a clean cup ready for recycling. And we asked them a number of things, but what we found was that empty and clean was the clearest language used. So clean on its own and empty on its own weren't enough. 40% or nearly 40% of residents felt that empty and clean was the clearest direction to get them to recycle their cup properly. Next slide, please.
So another aspect is, oh, go ahead.
No, go for it. Go for it, Marissa.
So the next aspect we wanted to know from residents is where they go to find out what is recyclable. So we know the behavioral, which language helps them figure out what's recyclable, but where do they go? So we asked them, we'll go to the next slide. Okay, so we asked them, they've got the item in their hand, what is the first thing they do to find out whether the item is recyclable or not? We really wanted that initial gut reaction of what they look at. So 51%, more than 50% of people look at the symbol on the package, which is this could be resin codes if it's plastic. This could be labeling system like the how to recycle labels, or the brand owner's own recycling message that's on the package. But recycling is local, and it also has a great opportunity for educators, recycling educators, to explain these labels. Many of them are clear and some of them are not, especially typically the resin codes tend to confuse people. So this is a good opportunity as you're reaching out one-on-one to your residents to let them know what these mean and what you should do subsequently by reading them. Also, the website was the second most common area for the first place that they look, but we're going to go into a little bit more detail on that in the next slide.
Sure. So as Marissa just said, when we asked where residents go for information on recycling, the first source, the most popular source for all age brackets, was the website, either city, county, or recycling company's website, which just stresses the need for having an updated and easy to navigate website with clear information. And you'll see also on their signage on the recycling cart or bin is also high up on the list, the recycling brochure. We didn't ask everybody about whether or not they had the magnet, but that's sort of how the statistics fell on whether or not a magnet was a first choice for residents to get information. One thing to also note, you'll see we broke this down by age group. The reason being is if you look at social media, while it was the least popular overall by all respondents, in that 18 to 34-year-old age group, it was the second most popular place to go for information. So your people in the 18 to 34-year-old category are going first to the website and second to social media. So if you're looking to target outreach to that particular age bracket, you may want to consider updating your social media platform as well as your website. Next slide, please. So one of the other things that we also looked at was recycling flyers, and what we gave respondents was a plastic clamshell. I'm going to call it a clamshell because I'm an industry person, that plastic container, and we asked them which flyer did residents find the clearest in order to help them recycle that plastic clamshell. And if we looked at the 3 flyer images that we gave them, in the first flyer, on flyer 1 on the left-hand side, you'll see that it's grouped by recycling, items that can be recycled, items that can be composted, and then garbage, what they're calling garbage down below. In the second flyer, the one in the center, items are grouped by category, paper, plastic, glass, metal. And in the third flyer, those items are just there, thrown up individually, and they're not sorted by category. So which flyer helped residents find their way to recycle the plastic container? Next slide.
Drum roll.
Ta-da! It's the second flyer, that flyer that groups things by category, paper, plastic, glass, and metal. Over 85% of residents said that that was the clearest in describing how to recycle the container. So categorizing recyclables and using images with short text. Images alone aren't necessarily enough, so we like the clear images with short text descriptions to help folks instruct them on how they're going to recycle their product. Next slide, please.
All right. So this provides a
Go for it, Marissa.
So this provides a little bit of a summary of what we've talked about thus far. So we just spoke about flyers and keeping everything in categories when possible, and then using regular instructions on how to prepare recyclables. That's a question we didn't feature, but we did find that in another question, that additional instructions on how best to prepare recyclables was very effective among residents in achieving especially more complicated recycling instructions. So think about that. We can assume from that people, even thinking about preparing recyclables, puts them in a different mentality, that maybe I need to think about this a little bit more before I throw it in the cart or bin. Secondarily, we talked about the website and how important it is to keep that updated. I also included a bullet point at the bottom here, including frequently asked questions that you actually hear from your residents, because you're the first point of contact from your residents, and they may have questions that are particular to your community. We talked about recycling being local, but instead of having a generic list of frequently asked questions, make them local for your particular program, and your residents will appreciate that. Social media, we already mentioned that, but I would also encourage people to have a plan. If you're going to interact in social media, whether it's for your particular recycling program or if it's for the city in general, have a plan, put together a calendar, and test your engagement. Because if you have a social media site that doesn't have engagement and back and forth, you're really missing an opportunity there, especially in that 18 to 34 age group. And then finally, in language, use common languages to describe the recycling terms in your resident voice and your resident things that ring true with them. Keep recycling instructions clear and simple, and focus on positive language when possible rather than your list of no's, and then just enable you to summarize those prohibitive items so they're not so long. You can also check with your MRF and find out what your top 3 issues are and focus on those rather than the top 17. And then I'll pass it over to Natha to wrap us up.
Sure. So what we wanted to do was give you a place to go. Kelly, can I have the next slide, please? Perfect. We want to encourage you all to visit recyclefsp.org for more information. Just to let you all know, if it's not up there right now, it will be very, very soon. We're actually going to provide the full report of the resident messaging survey you just heard about. It will be under that Communities tab that you see the second one in. Additionally, we also, just so everybody knows, we will also provide the webinar itself. The recording of the webinar will be available on the website as well.
So we're going to move quickly, just a couple of clarifying questions, and then we'll move on to Jason. But Natha, one question for you is, so none of the resident survey used the term styrofoam, or was styrofoam not a choice that was given? Can you clarify that one?
Yes, actually, specifically that question was asking if styrofoam is not an option, what do residents call that particular package?
So they weren't given that choice.
Not given that choice.
And then one quick question for Marissa. Did we test the words rinsed versus clean? We often have a question of, do I have to wash the container? So Marissa, you want to tackle that one real quickly?
Sure. So we had that on another, it was for another item. We did do rinse and clean, but it wasn't for one of the questions that we focused on this. So I would encourage you to go to the to recyclefsp.org and look at the full survey. I think that'll be a little bit more clear.
Yep. And I think the other thing to point out too is, in a time where water resources may be limited, rinsing may not be the best option for different people. So, okay, on that note, let's thank you very much, Natha and Marissa. We're going to move on to Jason Hale. Jason brings 2 decades of recycling experience to the table, having worked across the industry in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors at the local, state, and national level. Currently, he's part of the very skilled communications team at the Recycling Partnership, a group that FPI is very proud to support, forwarding the cutting edge of CART's communications and quality. So Jason, with that, I will turn it over to you.
Hey, thanks a lot. And wow, that was some really impressive information. I love the modern age of recycling because there's so much great information. And I think all of that's super useful and so pertinent to what we're doing today. Kelly, let's kick to the next slide. And for that matter, just in the interest of time, let's kick to the one after that. And you will see that the Recycling Partnership has, well, now 25 and counting and growing funders. Somewhere right in the middle there, we should be able to see FPI's logo in there, actually kind of on the right side, just above Target. And so we're really proud to be working with these guys. Obviously, they're very smart and engaged in all of this. And basically, we all collectively work to make recycling more and better. So to get more material out of the stream and into the manufacturing process, and make sure that material is of the highest quality to meet all the specs that we need and keep the system chugging along well. And so that's what we do, working nationally every day, hand in hand with communities across the country. So let's jump on to the next slide, Kelly. Keep it moving. And it really, oh, okay, so really I should have updated this slide. About once a quarter, we really update our numbers, and we've had 150 community partners who we worked hand in hand with on CART's quality and other issues to help improve their programs. And we've leveraged quite a bit of investment, so we're working all over the country. And that's really the point of this slide, is we're branching out as far as we can to improve programs on the ground and work regionally and nationally as well. But let's dig into really the meat of the matter, Kelly. Let's go to the next slide, please. And it's the question of how do we change behavior. I think when we talk education, that's really what we're trying to do. We've got, in this case, we're talking about resident education for local programs. And I'm differentiating that because likely those of you out there who run local programs, you're also educating your frontline staff pretty regularly. You're hopefully educating your elected officials and other decision makers about your program and opportunities. You're probably doing pretty hardcore communications with your hauler and MRF and other vendors. But in this case, we're talking, how do you change resident behavior? How do you get them to recycle more of something? And how do you get them to stop trying to recycle something that's problematic? So how do you change what they're doing right now? And so just, much like what FPI did with the information they just presented, the first thing we think about when we say, well, how do we change behavior is, well, what do we know about it? What do we know about behavior change? What do we know about what people think? So we go to the research and we say, what is known out there in the world of marketing and behavior change and recycling to affect these things? So we look at studies, and there's been a lot of them, studies done by folks like the state of Massachusetts and folks like Waste Management and our own group over the last 13 years, and several others along with personal experiences, to say what's worked, what hasn't, and how can we change behavior. So Kelly, let's run through a few slides. It'll be fairly quick, but we'll run through a few slides on some things that are pertinent, that are known, and that's kind of where you need to start when you're building your education program. What's known and what do you do about it? So for instance, we know that we can't only educate, that awareness and knowledge alone don't really change behavior. You have to go past that. Kelly, next slide, please. So operations is critical, and an example is if you're trying to clean up quality in the program, you can't just send out a mailer or do some social media posts that say something about, don't recycle this item because it's not okay in your cart. You actually need to get out on the street, feet on the street, to talk to residents. Another way to squint and look at it is if you really aren't doing much education and you start a pretty whiz-bang program, you can maybe get about a 20% bump in your recovery. But if you, say, switched from curbside bins to curbside carts, you'd probably get about a 50% increase in recovery. So if you want to maximize your system, you've got to go past just education. You have to pair it with actual hardcore operations. Let's pop to another one, Kelly. So people are confused, and I think that drives a lot of today's research, is how can we clear up their confusion? But people are super confused. Plastics is confusing for people in particular, and a lot of studies have shown that. The evolving packaging, what do I do with this new thing that I've never seen before? And then rules. I mean, we just heard examples around, boy, do you talk about rinsing or not? And what about the pizza boxes? Is it okay if it looks like this or it looks like that? And what about caps? Should they be on? Should they be off? And across towns and MRF sheds, we talk about things entirely differently, using different language, using different images. Some people use icons. And so it's just sort of like recycling soup out there, and people get kind of confused. And so Kelly, next slide. Basically the idea is create a common suite, a common list of materials that everybody uses, at very least across MRF sheds. So if there's a MRF serving a handful of communities, if they're all talking about materials in the exact same way, with the same imagery and the same voice, it cuts down on confusion because it's a repetitive, easier to grasp message. So working on that, making sure those pieces are as boiled down and simple and consistent as possible so that people can really get it, people who don't geek out on this stuff like you and I do. So next slide, please, Kelly. Teaching the children, boy, this is a big one. So teaching the children is super important because we're building that next generation of recyclers. So they need to be an audience, but they're not the only audience. And a lot of times professional recyclers sort of hone in on the kids. But point of fact, a lot of research has pointed to most households, the opinions of the kids and kind of their pushing actually doesn't affect current behavior in the household. And so if you're trying to affect a short-term behavior, just going to the kids is probably not going to cut it. So next slide, Kelly, we'll talk about how you really need to reach past that. You need to get more universal to anybody who might be recycling, and particularly those who are under recycling, if you have good data around those pieces. But we can't only focus on the children. So that's a big thing around who's your audience. So let's go to the next slide, Kelly. Okay, convenience and positive perception have to win out. If it's not easy, people aren't going to do it. That's why bins do better than drop-off centers and carts do better than bins, because it's more convenient. And if people perceive barriers, people are busy, and this is only so important to folks. So while they want it, they're only going to go so far to do it. So we need to make sure that it's approachable and it's simple enough to handle it relative to any barriers. So next slide as the final take-home point on that one would be to, Kelly, build a culture with positive feelings. And so that basically means make it feel good. Long-term behavior change, to maintain it, you really need to actually stay positive. I mean, I'm not saying go be Mary Poppins, but stay positive. And if you need to do something negative, hey, don't do that. Save it for a very short-term, immediate need. Boy, stop putting clothing into your recycling cart because it's jamming up our system. Okay, do that as a short-term thing, get people trained, and then go back to your positive message and make them feel good about their participation, barrier-free, and happy. So what does all of that mean when you kind of put it in a nutshell and say, let's apply it somewhere? So next slide, please, Kelly. It means, first off, let's make recycling approachable. And so rather than the old approach of just having somebody smiling as they drop a packaging type into a recycling container, let's go a little bit more lifestyle. Recycling's there, it's everywhere, it's a part of life, and let's pull some emotion into it. And you see a little note at the bottom of the slide that basically most decision making is emotive and happens without so much conscious thought. And so let's tap into that a little bit and not be so literal, but do it just like the big brands do it. Let's tap into the emotion. And let's go to the next slide and talk more about what that means. And what you're going to see is engaging slogans that aren't just geeked out about recycling, but are sort of feel-good campaigns, pieces that can be common threads across what you're doing. And then to a lot of points that have already been made, if you look at the bottom right, you'll see the same best practices that Marissa was just discussing, where we have what we like to call tidy piles, these small representations of types of items with a few words to support them. And so this is the kind of thing that you can put out across your whole community. So not the giant laundry list of the 80 things you're actually collecting, but a few simple categories that you can stick to and repeat and get into people's brains. So do that, as well as the no list. Keep your no list short. You'll see 5 items here. Boy, I wish it were 2 or 3, but in this case, the MRFs we worked with pointed to these 5 items and said, boy, we're really having problems with all 5 of these. And I could talk for years about that kind of thing. So instead, I'm going to choose to move on, and we'll have another conversation about the no item list. So Kelly, what's up next? Our approach, I think, is what's going to be up next. And so what do you do with all this stuff? You've got images, and you've got icons, and you've got a way to represent your materials simply. How do you piece all that together? And so we look at it pretty simply, a simple model. We call it 311 because it sounds nice and is an information call number. But basically 3 things that you just got to do them. And you can apply some of the techniques that we've already heard about to date. But basically, you need to make sure you're informing your residents in a concrete way about the basic do's and don'ts. Tell them what you want, tell them what you don't, tell it simply. Make sure it gets to them in their hands. And it can be as simple as a postcard or a magnet, or whatever other mechanism reaches your folks the best. You also need, ideally, personalized feedback. And the reason is most people think they're recycling correctly. A lot of people actually aren't. And even if you catch them in the act of recycling incorrectly, they think they're doing the right thing. And so you kind of have to shake them a little bit and say, hey, no, we actually mean you. This thing's not so good. And so an easy example is if you're working on quality, an oops card. So something that somebody looks into someone's bin or cart at their curb, sees a problematic material, marks it, and leaves the material behind, and the resident has to come home and deal with it. And they say, oh, you mean me, and this is not okay. I see. It kind of shakes them out of their normal day. And that's important for behavior change, to really get people's attention so they'll pay attention to the rest of it. And once you've done that, you kind of double down. And so an issue-specific campaign around doubling down is smart, something that's just one simple message, not recycle these 8 things and go to Earth Day and buy a compost bin, but just, hey, don't do this one thing. Or to flip it on its head, if you're not fighting contamination and you're, say, adding a new material, hey, add this one new material. Just a single message campaign ideally that gets in people's hands and is reinforced through other media. So it could be something as simple as a big sturdy postcard and whatever other mechanism reaches your audience the best. Is that social media postings? Could be. Is it a billboard? Possibly. Is it signage on a bus? Maybe that. Could it be all of them? Yeah, that'd be even better. But basically do those things, do them every year on your biggest issue. Next slide, please, Kelly. And then the one and the one, which will be the next slide. One is general promotions. So general advertising, the idea that you need to build a culture of recycling in your community by just reminding people, we're a recycling community. Hey, recycle. Hey, go get it. You know, we like to recycle here. And so as long as you're doing that periodically throughout the year, at least 2 media at a time, so that you're staying in front of people with our community cares about this. Basically, you're supporting your other messaging and you're building a recycling culture. And then last up, and boy, did they hit on that in the last presentation, your standard resource, your website. Nowadays, you just have to have it up to date. And there are groups out there who can help you work on that. Keeping a municipal website up to date is tough, but there are external groups who can help you with those kind of things. And so, you know, look around at all of your resources, and we'd be happy to talk in more detail about that. But basically, if you want good customer service, when somebody has a question, you need to be able to answer it, and they're probably going to go online to look for it. So to the best of your ability, updating all of your stuff, make sure you hit on that piece too. And so it begs the question, does all this stuff work? So next slide, please, Kelly. And this is kind of how things went. We tested some of this out, fighting contamination in Massachusetts. So on some of the curbside routes, here's some stuff that we saw. And I'm going to breeze through this in the interest of time. But one route or one community is called Lowell. It's a nice little community outside of Boston. And when we started, I just want you to pay attention to the red line. When we started engaging with on their worst quality route to figure out, can we make improvements? We walked the streets and tagged carts and did all of the other things I just talked about. And in the beginning, we were tagging a lot of carts. And that's the red line kind of up high on the left side of the screen. And you see it drops precipitously and kind of stays low. And that's a trend we saw everywhere we went and did this. But basically it showed, boy, if we engage and we engage like this, we can really get people's attention. And so in the end, this meant we dropped the problematic households down from a lot to a few very quickly, and it maintained at a lower level. Next slide, Kel. Would show us that the contamination levels originally were at about 37%, and after our interventions, they dropped down to 26%. And so, yeah, 26% still, it's not zero, it's still higher than we would like, but boy, it dropped by like a third, and that's after one 8-week engagement. That's pretty darn good. And so it's getting there. It's getting to where we want to go. People are paying attention. Behavior is changing. It's working. Next slide, please. And this last slide is going to show you, this last results slide is going to show you, we targeted one material. Remember I said, boy, focus on one message on your most critical thing. In this case, it was, according to the MRF, our biggest problem, stuff in bags, whether it's garbage or recyclables. When it comes into the MRF, they were having a problem and just tossing it because they never knew what was in there. And it was heavy, it was big, and it was causing problems in their equipment as well. And so before our interventions, 43% of the contamination in the stream by weight was stuff in bags, and after our intervention, it was all the way down to 15%. So a 2/3 reduction in the most targeted material. So did we get people's attention through this approach? You bet. Did they change their behavior because of it? You bet. So point being, data's fun, and these approaches do actually work. Just a couple more slides, and I'll turn things over. But Kelly, next slide, please. Just want to make the point that we don't just work on one specific issue, and so I was just talking a lot and showing results and materials around fighting contamination. We do a ton with launching carts. We also do a ton with basically boosting participation and resident engagement. And so here are just some pretty pictures to sort of make that point. And next slide, please, Kelly, which I think is my last one. And what you're going to see is a pretty picture of a lovely computer that if you go to our website and go to the tools section, so recyclingpartnership.org, and just click on tools, you're going to see exactly this. And the main things that we have listed are tools to fight contamination, recycle with carts, and to boost participation. primarily because we get to travel around the country and work with a lot of great communities, and these are the three issues that they bring up more than anything else. So we said we're going to provide tools, open source and free, for all three of those things. And so we have that. You can go grab it right now, use it, let us know how it goes. We're happy to talk to you about it and work with you on it. There are other resources out there for sure. Everybody's rowing in a good direction nowadays, but please check it out. And with that, I will stop talking. And thanks a lot for letting me share.
Thanks so much, Jason. I've got one easy question and one hard question for you. The easy question, I know. The easy one is, can you share with folks, maybe to us, and then what you can provide it to other people, the material that you distributed to the targeted routes in Lowell that showed those amazing results? Is that available someplace for people to see?
Yeah, it actually lines up exactly with, if you go to that open source part of our website and click through to the tools, you'll see, you will see all of it. And in, oh gosh, about a month, we're working on finalizing it right now. And around, I want to say December 2nd, we plan to put up some results slides that point specifically to what we did and all of the results from all that Massachusetts work. And so there will be more to come. And if somebody really wants to dig into the weeds and geek out, please tell them to call me or email me, because I would love to.
Okay.
What's the hard one?
Sounds great. The hard one, okay, this is a great one, and this will be a nice segue into Brenda's as well. But Jason, what do you think about this question? How do you build universal awareness when you have single stream and dual stream in the same state, different municipalities or cities in the same county? Collecting different items and recycling that is not mandatory. How do you like that one? What do you guys say to that one?
I like it, and it does get sticky. And you know, we've looked at how do you go past the MRF shed. So first off, within a MRF shed, not so tough, right? If it's one, like I had the chance to talk to Swaco in Ohio today. Giant 41 communities, one MRF, fabulously easy. And the short answer is, Lynn, it gets sticky once you throw in all those variables. And in the end, there's not an easy answer. It's rolling up your sleeves and looking for commonalities. And you know, point of fact, different MRFs are using you know, sort of different materials that they might accept as a competitive edge. And so boiling down how you talk to residents about what is it and isn't accepted gets challenging in that environment. And there's just, the short of it is there's no substitute for actually digging in, having conversations, bringing people to the table, surveying everybody to see what they take. And on our website, on that tool site, the first thing you end up getting pointed to is a ready-to-go MRF survey to figure that out. What do they take? What do they kind of take, but they don't really talk about? And what are their biggest bugaboos, which we can pretty easily talk about as well, because we've talked to MRFs across the country, like representing 3/4 of the processing capacity around all these things. But gather those facts, boil it down to what you really need residents to know, and then roll up your sleeves and do the work, community by community sometimes, to get there. And it may be that a state can't get there and have one common suite across the whole state. So do you chunk it out? And I guess the last thing I would say is, if you picture, and I picture this all the time, you know, if you picture yourself and you drive to work in one town and you live in a second town and you're in a bowling league or something in a third town, and each town you go to, you see recycling messaging that's vastly different, you're going to be confused. So anything you can do to cut that out and norm that out, even if there are a few subtle changes, you're going to be ahead for the resident.
Okay, thanks so much, Jason. We're going to move on to our last panelist, Brenda Pulley. Brenda joined KAB, Keep America Beautiful, in the fall of 2010 to enhance the organization's efforts to improve recycling, specifically how to engage and motivate the individuals to recycle the right materials. In her role to grow the reach and impact of KAB's recycling initiative, she's been responsible for strategic planning, research, program design, and implementation, building from KAB's behavioral change system. Brenda also serves on the board of the Sustainable Electronics Recycling International, whose mission it is to promote environmentally responsible reuse and recycling practices throughout the electronics sector. KAB is another organization that FPI is proud to support. And Brenda, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Lynn. Hello, everyone. It's a delight to add to this body of knowledge and to share with you some of the learnings and the tools that we all have. So next slide. I am going to move quickly because we want to get to whatever questions. And I just want to, frankly, sort of reinforce and build on both of what the previous speakers have talked about, and that's primarily to share with you, yes, some of our insights as well as some of our tools, okay? So the next slide, just I'm hopeful that most of you are aware of Keep America Beautiful and what we do. I will just say that it is about providing tools and resources, yes, to our affiliates, but also to other partners like yourself, particularly when it comes to recycling. We focus on 3 areas. They're end littering, improve recycling, and beautify communities in America. Next slide. The key thing when it comes to improving recycling, again, is how do we help change those attitudes and behaviors? How do we help educate and motivate people to recycle the right things? So we're all sort of in this together and collaborating, and I see our role as how together can we make recycling easier? And I think that's a fair focus of what we're trying to do. Next slide. We do, as Jason talked about, yes, it's how do you change that behavior. It's going beyond just education. Education does matter, don't get us wrong, but it's really how do you help motivate that person at the end of the day, really nudge them to take that action, that desirable action that we want them to do. We have a number of programs. They're at different times of the year. They're tailored to different audiences. That slide is just to say that's sort of the overview of them. I'm only going to talk about a couple things today. Next slide. Just a little bit of insights. I don't think this is new to anyone, but just as we do our continuous recycling survey as well, the good news is people do want to recycle. That green, that 52% you see, that's what we call our target market. It's usually, frankly, from about 50 to 60% of what we call the general public, and they want to recycle. They might sometimes recycle. What we want to do, right, collectively, is nudge them a little bit, encourage them so that they'll become sort of everyday recyclers, if you will. So that's our target audience. Next slide. The other thing we look at is also the ease of recycling. I think for today's call, this probably comes as no surprise to anyone. Sometimes these numbers are even higher, but it's also about, we know it's about making recycling convenient for people, and that's why when you look at places outside the home, sometimes you see that it becomes much more difficult to recycle, but the low-hanging fruit is the residents, and this plays out in the survey results we have here. Next slide. So I want to spend just a few moments talking about the National Public Service Campaign where we've partnered with the Ad Council. We're in our 3rd year now. I am hopeful that all of you on this call are aware of it, and I'm hopeful that maybe you've even seen one of the ads on television or in print or heard one of the radio commercials that we have. It is designed about, yes, increasing recycling participation with a real focus on how do you make that emotional link? How do we bring meaning back and passion back up to why to get people to recycle? So that was sort of fundamentally, yes, raising awareness, but with some kind of emotional hook to it. Next slide. I'm going to go past that. Next slide. What I did want to do is, if you haven't been on any one of our webinars where we've talked about the different themes that were researched as part of the campaign. This was before we came out with the campaign theme. There were a number of different themes that were studied, that were researched via several focus groups. I always do say it was one of the most, that I know of, one of the most researched themes. But it really was to try to get those insights of what are the barriers, why are people not recycling, what might motivate them to help recycle. And of all those that we studied, the one that resonated the most, again, for general audiences, that movable middle, there are lots of different things that different people are attracted to, but one which had the most widespread resonance, if you will, was this potential of trash. And it really was that people became much more engaged when they realized that something didn't have to be wasted in a landfill, but in fact it could become something new and different. That's really where we started to see the optimism and the imagination of people started to spark. So next slide. So that's why the campaign theme, or the real call to action, is to give your garbage another life. And then what we have is the different products that are personified with this sort of plea, if you will. I want to be recycled. I want to be a pair of jeans. Or we're working with Best Buy right now, and on their .com boxes it says, I want to be a pizza box, so please recycle me. So that's both what the call to action is and the theme, and most importantly, the why. I think we all know when we're coming out with new research that only reinforces there's a lot of skepticism about recycling and what really happens to recyclables. And we all know there are a lot of reasons to that we could do a whole webinar on. But really where you can reinforce with people about that what recycling and the recyclables get made into, that's a message that tends to resonate. Next slide. I'm not going to play the slides, just you can click through the next slide, please, too, Kelly. But what I wanted you to know is we now have 6 different television commercials. Some of those are in Spanish. Some of those go, they're from bottles and cans to personal care items. So we say taking recycling into the bathroom, if you will. And then there are a couple that we've worked with Amazon that are cardboard boxes recycling. And in fact, those are targeted to a younger audience. Next slide. The key thing that I want for you, in addition to give you insights to the campaign theme, is just to let you know it is a multimedia campaign. And the good news is, I mean, we are looking for creative ideas of how the campaign can be applied. But for you, particularly for, I know you are on here, are responsible for communication in your community, please know that all these assets, whether it's infographics, etc., are available for your use. They, in fact, have to go into donated media, but they are here developed for you to use. Next slide. The next few slides just share with you, we are incredibly active in social media. It is very much designed at all different kinds of topics for you to use in any way that you can and localize it any way you can. So I encourage you, if you are not currently following the I Want to Be Recycled campaign, and particularly Keep America Beautiful Facebook, I encourage you to look at that. Clearly with America Recycled Day coming, we're even more active than usual, by the way. But please take a look. Next slide. There are many extensions of this campaign, and whether it's in theaters, there's been social media campaigns where we've asked people to vote on what they want recycled items to be. So again, I invite you to be creative, and we are happy to collaborate and explore ideas of how the assets can be used. Next slide. Next slide, please. I think the one thing that I would say about the results today, yes, it's over 125 million in ad value, which is great. But the key thing is, if you see that bottom number, we've driven almost 4 million people to the website. So people do want to know more. It also reinforces that research we've heard earlier that people do want to go to a website. The idea obviously is to get them local to their local information as soon as possible, which we do on that website. But it reinforces what you've heard today, that people do want to find out. They do go to the website to find that information. Next slide. Look, like everybody else, this wouldn't happen without our many sponsors on this campaign. Next slide, please. So this is just a reminder to you, whether you want to wrap the truck, whether you want to work with your medias, if you own media stations, the government you can use. Just a reminder, please take a look at those assets and you can use them. The next slide, if some of you have an interest in saying we want to explore this to be our media campaign, our recycling campaign, and pay to place it, we can talk about that. There are definitely opportunities. Austin's probably one of the best examples that have used it. They've seen incredible results. So happy to share more details about that. Just contact us. Next slide. What I really want to spend a few minutes is, I'll go into America Recycled Day, but like all of us, the way we're collaborating is, the goal is to keep recycling simple. I know I'm only saying what others have said. I know we want to tell everybody everything, but in fact, I have this 80-20 rule. If we can just keep it very simple and digestible of what people, to get them started into recycling and recycling the most important things, or to make sure those things that cause the most contamination, frankly, don't get in the recycling bin, that's what we're trying to do. So it is, how do we unify the messaging, how do we simplify it and amplify it? And these are just a couple examples of the tools that we have. As you now know, there are many tools at your disposal that I think we all want you to take, to tweak. Please use and build on them. Next slide. A couple of things I thought for most of you, because this is very much curbside focused, and we know that single stream is so predominant out there, just a couple insights, and this was done in preparation for in-the-field research that we're doing. But two things I want to leave you with in the body of knowledge that we've all shared. When we did an online survey, what we found was in asking people certain things about recycling, color matters in this world, and that the good news is if there's any way you can use the color blue for your recycling bin or cart or lid, we encourage you to do that. 79% of people that we polled identified blue as a recycling bin. We're working on that compost bin, by the way. I won't go into that, but there's room to look at what may be done there. The next thing I want to leave you with is we oftentimes see flyers that say single stream recycling. And in testing that message between single stream and a couple other terms, single stream, only 11% of respondents answered that they knew single stream meant that you could put multiple recyclables in a bin. The term that we found resonated most with people, or was most clear, by the way, was mixed recycling. So I invite you either to use that term or maybe to do a survey of your residents and find what works best for them. But as you look at your informational brochures, if you see the word single stream, I would ask you to rethink if that's the term you want to use. Next slide. I want to spend just a moment on America Recycles Day. I know we're coming down to the end, but it is next week. I oftentimes get asked if events have to be held on America Recycles Day. Absolutely not. We find the bulk of the events do happen the week leading up to and after, so there's still time if you want to plan an event. I would encourage you that this year particularly, we're inviting our partners to think about using it and leveraging it as to really reinforce, yes, raise awareness about recycling, but really take it to leverage what can be recycled and frankly what cannot be recycled. So leverage it in that way if you can. We are inviting people, this year's theme is the hashtag BeRecycled. It's about inviting people to live a recycled lifestyle. Jason, you talked a bit about that lifestyle, and it is true. We want people to think about wherever they are to think about it. We're also embracing the reduce, reuse, recycle, and buy recycled in this year's theme. Next slide. Toolkit. If you have not gone to the America Recycles Day website and looked at the resources on how to organize or other tools, we invite you to do that. There's a multitude of materials, go-to guides, templates, customizable resources at your disposal. Please, always looking for feedback on those. I will tell you that we most recently posted key messages and a letter to the editor, and there are proclamations templates. So if this is a time to help get visibility and maybe free media with your local newspaper or radio. And so there are some key messages available for you to use, or work with your community leaders to host an event and get media that way. Proclamations, etc. So please check that site out if you're looking for ideas. Next slide. And I'm going to leave that. This just gives you some ideas of what you can do. We do have some, we're very active socially, as I indicated, particularly about reinforcing taking the pledge. I invite you to consider that. And the next slide is only in summary of, I think, much of what we've all been saying. It's great to hear the consistency. Because that's what we want. I want to reinforce what everybody said. It's about convenience, but it's also convenience in helping people very simply, communicating to them very positively, as you've all heard, and as we say, being very consistent in a clear, concise way. That also adds to making recycling an easy thing to do. Next slide. And I am going to end on that note and happy to answer any questions.
Sounds great, Brenda. Thank you so much. I just have one quick question for you. I thought it was interesting whether people understood mixed recycling versus single stream recycling. Did you happen to test out the term or the phrase commingled recycling? Did that work at all, or did people know what that meant, or no?
We actually did test that number, and I can only tell you it ranked better. I don't have the data point in front of me. We did test that when those were the three terms, frankly, that we tested. I know that it did better than single stream, but not as well as mixed recyclables.
Okay, that's great to know. All right, I think I have less than 60 seconds to wrap this up. So just as a reminder, a copy of this presentation and the webinar itself will actually be on www.recyclefsp.org in the community section. So we invite you to go there. Up on this slide, we have the contact information for all of our presenters. Certainly would like to give a warm thank you to Natha, Marissa, Jason, and Brenda for joining us today. And I certainly hope that this has been beneficial for you and you'll be able to take some of these tips and guides and tactics back to your own organizations. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks so much, and go vote, everybody. Thanks.